Hello, everyone. It's lovely to see you. I am starting to feel better. That makes me very happy. My name is Ariana. I am the co-director of the Consent Academy, a Seattle-based nonprofit that aims to promote consent culture in all of its complexity and potential as part of daily life. And I'm so happy to be here. Um, I do have energy, Krillin. Also, I meant to start on this meme. That's what I was wanted to open with. I was like, yeah, this meme is super funny. Anyway, it's also a heat wave here in Austria. So I'm a big sweaty mess. I'm wearing like one of my thinnest, most breathable pieces of clothing that's not workout clothes. I have not resorted to just wearing workout clothes yet, but we will see. That may change because it's supposed to be even hotter tomorrow. But it's really lovely to be here with all of you. Thank you all for understanding that I did not have the energy last Sunday. Turns out I got a bacterial infection in my ears and my sinuses and my lungs, and it sucks. It probably got a lot worse because the last day of that festival, I woke up and we were in this like really rural area, and there was all of this these farms around us, and all of the farmers were cutting their grass. I think I told you all this last week, but I don't actually remember. They were cutting their grass the same day, and it was clearly some kind of plant that my body was just like, this is an attack on me personally, and I will defend myself. But anytime your sinuses get inflamed, anytime you get stuffed up here, that doesn't allow fluid and air to come out of your ears and kind of exchange this whole system as well. And it does create a nice environment for things to breed. And probably I had gotten exposed to some bacteria that was going to make me sick. And then, right at the right moment, I also had this allergic reaction to some grass, and it completely stopped me up. And here we are. Anyway, I'm starting to feel better. I got some antibiotics because, yeah, I think I told you all this, but I don't remember last week actually. I saw that I streamed last week, and I don't actually remember any of it. I was very sick. But they put this like I went to an ear, nose, and throat doctor, and they put this long tube like when you get the COVID tests all the way in, but it has a little camera and they can see, and they were like, "Ew, you're you're having a tough time in your sinuses." Anyway, I'm starting to feel better. Um, I'm also really happy. My mom is here visiting. I haven't seen my mom since 2019. Like we video chatted plenty, but not in person. Yeah, I'm glad you could tell I was loopy. I was definitely loopy. The one thing I do remember is that I couldn't always remember more than usual what I was planning to say about halfway through a sentence. And I was just like, yes. And that was the night that I ended up going to the sort of after hours urgent care at the hospital. And they said I was really sick. Anyway, I'm feeling better now. Very happy. It's a heat wave. I don't like hot weather. Anyway, I like this meme, this picture. I want to talk about a bunch of fun things today and some serious stuff. And first, I just want to start with this meme. And it's this lyrics to this lyrics to a song that's a really good song, but it's an image of a van that crashed into a house and like plowed through the wall. And it says, and the lyrics are, and you may find yourself behind the wheel of a large automobile, and you may find yourself in a beautiful house with a beautiful wife, and you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here? And it's just funny because the song is more about like waking up and not recognizing. Yeah, same as it ever was, Krellin. About like kind of not recognizing your own life and how you got there, and among other things. But then it's really funny because it could also mean you crashed your house or crashed your car into someone's house. Anyway, crashed your house. That makes sense. All right, next meme. Some people say we need hyper intelligent networks of self driving cars to solve urban traffic problems. Me, an intellectual, train. And this is one of those things where, yes, this is like cute and funny and cheeky, but I also like it to think about how sometimes focusing too strictly on a problem actually makes it harder for us to see solutions. And also the things that we're like used to make it harder for us to see solutions. So we can be so fixated on cars are the default mode of transportation that we can forget to do things like include other options and make sure other types of transport and infrastructure are accounted for. All of that. And that is a bummer. And it makes things worse because, sure, hyper intelligent network of self driving cars is a thing. Um, yes, you're right, Krellin. It's reached full meme state that Silicon Valley just keeps reinventing things that already exist. And it's like, yeah, their automated bodega is just a vending machine. Exactly. Or these like lift pools that go on a scheduled route. I'm like, that's just a bus. You just invented a bus. And, you know, the one thing that something like Lyft might have that the local government doesn't is a little bit better data on where people tend to be and then where people who are in a particular area tend to want to go and can build a route along that. Whereas, you know, the ways that a city planner might pick a bus route or a train is looking at other types of data and understanding of population dynamics and where people tend to want to go, but there is going to always be these gaps. And so these companies that then get all this tracking data can, what they could be doing is then selling that data to the local government to help them improve, say, bus routes because they have better information, or the local government could ask people to put the app on their phone and say like where they are and where they want to get to anytime they would call a taxi or wish they could get on a bus. You know, there are lots of options. And it's really tough because I think sometimes we only know the sort of world that we're born into, and anything up through sort of our adolescence into our mid 20s, however the world is at that time tends to be feel default to us, tends to feel logical and kind of automatic. Um, and unfortunately, that means that unless we have really good relationships with elders of any kind, we have very little historical memory, and so we don't tend to realize how much things have already changed, even in our, just before we were born to our mid 20s. And we also tend to forget that people in the past did not just have terrible, miserable lives. They had perfectly good lives. They did perfectly good things, and they managed to make lots of perfectly different situations work very well for them. Um, yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about this very simple meme, as usual. All right, next one. This one is a new subreddit that I found, Architectural Revival. And I don't necessarily like it in the sense of just like, one, I'm not into this one as a sort of worship of traditional European architecture as somehow better or whatever. More, I like that it can show you such a good sense of place all over. So you've got this one, Bremen, Germany, and it's these nice little like side streets, but you can see even with these not very tall buildings, there's a lot of mixed use here. So the upper floors are very likely to be apartments or condos. And then you can see like there are modern windows installed here. They're not just like these old rickety windows. These have been upgraded. So the energy, I don't want to say this, efficiency is probably better because the windows aren't just like leaking all the hot air in winter. And there are things you can do to retrofit these kinds of buildings and maintain them. But then, you know, imagine you live here and then you want to go to a bar with your friends and you literally can just go downstairs and walk next door and meet all your friends from the neighborhood. And you go there and then maybe you want to get like a new shirt and you can go over to this store at some point, and then you want some ice cream and you go down here, and oh, you need some books and there's a store around the corner, and you can kind of get everything you want to need within 10, 15 minutes of where you live. And that would end up meaning that you're likely to have a lot of friends who live in the same area as you, as long as you talk to your neighbors and want that. Um, but that like going to run errands doesn't have all these extra costs of like needing a car, paying for gas, paying for parking if you have to, you know, options. And it helps create more of this hyper local culture because if I'm mostly, say, buying clothing that is sold at the not chain stores that are in my local area, I'm likely to have, for example, slightly different fashion than, say, someone who even lives on the other side of the same city. And that's interesting. That's going to be more creative. That's going to probably lead to neighborhoods having characteristics. There's one of my favorite cities in the whole world is in Italy. It's called Siena, and it's a circle like a lot of old European cities, and they have a city center that's a big open round area. And every year they have these horse races, but they're done traditionally, so there's no saddles or anything. And basically anything goes. So all these neighborhoods, there's these different districts that are sort of like pizza slices for this whole circular city, and each neighborhood is a different team. And in like the week or two leading up to the event, it's really wild. Like anything goes. Like people and like you're not allowed to hurt the riders or hurt the horses, but people are not above kidnapping them, trying to get them ill, you know, trying to get them too drunk that they couldn't compete the next day, that kind of thing. And hi, Paladin Hulk. And yeah, districts competing. It's like the Hunger Games, except this is just for fun, right? So this really fits this whole like carnival that Surviving the Future is talking about. You have group belonging, you have skill being shown, you have revelry, you have something that's like outside of normal behavior. Like normally, if you kidnap somebody or steal a horse, you're going to go to jail. But in this period of time related to these races, it's all fun and games as long as it's, you know, for this kind of purpose. And everyone wears traditional medieval clothing. And then whichever district wins spends like the next week parading up and down all the other districts, playing like the theme song on like traditional instruments and waving their like ancient flag and wearing like these very old costumes and like bragging and all the rest of the districts. Hey, we won, we kicked your butts, isn't this amazing? And I ended up going there as a teenager. It was like the one big vacation I took with my family as a teenager. We went to Italy. It was very cool. My dad's a big history buff, and I was studying Latin. And so it worked out really nicely. We could kind of like, the two of us could create these like tours, and my younger brother was there. And so we kind of like went around and did all the stuff together. Um, and we were there the week after the horse races. We didn't know this existed. We missed it, but we were there to see all the parades happening, and it was very fun. Um, and you think about each neighborhood had a theme song, had its colors, had a flag, had a different style of like costume that they wore, and a different way of like bragging in the other neighborhoods. And this was fun. This was not like dangerous. This was not harmful. This was not like anything violent. It was carnival, right? And it created this sort of alternate temporary reality that fit all of these different things. And these festivals, yes, tourists would come to see them, but this was not for tourists. It was very much for the people who live in this city. And it was not like something that was just a performance to get people to come in and spend money. It really was not about that. And it's so cool because it's this hundreds of year old tradition, as far as I understand it, that is like so well preserved and still gives this. There's a reason why me as a 16, 17-year old, you know, teenager have such beautiful feelings and memory toward this city. Teenagers are notoriously nonplussed about things, but because the city had anything unique, this character, it had a sense of place. And even though we went through Tuscany, and my dad, there was like some movie about Tuscany that had come out around the same time, and my dad really wanted to see it and go to stay at a vineyard and all that stuff. And this was all good and nice. But this city, I remember, it like really remember. I remember what it felt like to be there, what the streets were like, what The people were like, what, all of that, so much better than pretty much any place I'd ever gone. And it's because it had a sense of place and it had a character and it had its own culture. And we don't need to keep everything in terms of identity on the hyper individual or the universal. You can have community and collective identities that are strong, and it doesn't make it more likely to like have war with your neighbor or something. It doesn't have to be that way. Anyway, I like this subreddit because it really shows you senses of place. I think I actually have it in a different tab here. You can just see like lots of different places that Cameroon, even things in Germany, Czech Republic, um, Lebanon, different parts of France, England. This is some United States stuff, Vietnam. One of the other things is that the building styles here tended to be things that were specially made to fit the actual environment, the weather, the ecosystem. It's about what made sense. When I lived in southern Japan, most of the buildings, like the schools I taught at, were open air buildings. There was no way to like really seal the whole thing up because while it got cold in winter, it never was freezing. And you could close the windows and stuff like that, and you could put the heater on and make the room a bit warmer. But you didn't often need that because, like, just having, most Japanese high schools, it's like 40 students per class. The 40 students and the teachers and whoever, and just closing the windows and the doors, that was usually enough bodies to warm the room up sufficiently. And but on the flip side, outside of the very short period of time where it's actually cold, the rest of the time it's so hot and so humid, everything would mold. First of all, like if you washed your clothing and you hung it on the laundry to dry, there was a non-zero chance it was going to get moldy. That's how humid, especially Kyushu, really is. It's rough. And things would basically never dry. It was very difficult. And so you wanted things to be as open air as possible. You wanted to create as many cross breezes as possible. So the buildings were really built very different from any other kind of high school I've been to really let airflow come through, to make it so there was no place where the air would get stagnant and allow water to accumulate, for example. And it didn't seem very modern. I think a lot of Americans would go to that building and think it felt run down because there was a lot of like just pure poured concrete, sort of exposed stuff. And there was bits that were wooden and whatnot in these like nice areas, but for the most part, everything was tile and concrete, and you had the glass sliding doors and stuff, but that was it. And it was meant to help keep everything as cool as possible and to prevent mold. And it wasn't run down, it just fit the needs of the environment. And you look at, I mean, this is not necessarily fitting the needs of environment. This is fitting the needs of ostentation. But it's beautiful and it has a sense of character and creates its own sort of impression upon you. And one of the other things is some of these buildings, you might start to think that a lot of this stuff that's really, where is it up here? Decadent, this kind of stuff. Some people might start to argue, okay, it's all beautiful, but it all starts to look the same, but it doesn't actually. If you slow down and really look at comparing even things built in different countries during a similar period, there is going to be differences in, how big are the windows, how the windows layered, what decoration is above and below the windows, how many triangles do they use, versus like half moons, and what are the tops of the towers like. And it seems subtle, especially in a world where we're used to having a lot of novelty, a lot of stimulation, a lot of newness all the time. But these are things that really create, if you slow down and really pay attention to it, a different type of memory and a different type of sense of connection to the place. And then you have Mali, for example, and like this is clearly built for the type of environment and the weather that is there and the needs. And this area in Spain, and like you get some stuff that's more modern import in different places. But here, this is South Korea, also hot and humid like Japan. Hi, Silly Mithiel, long time no see. And I agree with you, Paladin Hulk. There are a lot of dull building designs these days. And this you can see very well here. This place, South Korea, this is aiming to get maximum airflow, right? Like this is a building, it protects you from the rain. These overhangs of the roofs go pretty far out to really keep rain from coming in and getting as much as possible on things like this wood, because you wouldn't want to warp it over time. And it's meant to let as much airflow come in as possible. Here's something in the UAE. These are senses of place. This is interesting that this is a historical house. And this creates a lot of benefit. A lot of benefit. So anyway, check this out. Architectural revival. Yeah. Okay. Look at how beautiful this is. I don't know. They're all beautiful. They all have this like uniqueness to them. I feel like it's really good. Okay. I'm gonna close these two tabs. Then there's another subreddit I found recently that's just called Walkable Streets. And I just want to look at this. This is in Spain. You can see that there's lots of tree cover. So this is, for example, going to help keep these buildings cooler, reduce noise pollution, reduce air pollution. These are a type of plantain tree, like not the fruit, but it's a type of tree, it looks like. And unfortunately, a lot of these are dying. We had a lot of them in Aix, where I used to live in France, and they were planted by Napoleon to make it so that his soldiers marching in southern France could march in the shade. And there's like a disease that's sort of sweeping them because they're imported from, I think, India. But so one small negative aspect. But you can see here, like, there are lots of stores and restaurants, and people linger, and it's walkable, and it's bike friendly, and these sidewalks are wide enough that you could actually go down there on a wheelchair. Hi, Orcrist. You said, I'm reminded about indigenous architecture and how efficient it is, especially in the Southwest. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so many cities that were in North America that were destroyed intentionally to kind of destroy history, to destroy a sense of place, to destroy the ability to claim history, to be able to connect with it for all of these different reasons. And it's had a bunch of negative impacts, but it also makes us tend to think that a lot of Native Americans were like living in mud huts or whatever. Not that mud huts are even a bad type of architecture, like up through the potato famine and afterwards, most of Ireland are people who lived in mud houses. And that's not a bad type of architecture, right? It's we tend to think of it as like something that we've overcome, but it has its points and its purposes. Anyway, Silly Millie, you said, I miss Spain. I've been using my Spanish living skills to survive a heat wave the last few days. Yeah. Yeah. I hate heat, but I've been using my time in southern Japan to survive a heat wave here too. It's rough. And it does, living in a place that's just so hot all the time really does teach you how to survive. Anyway, looking at these streets that have these different sort of characters to them, that are also inviting, that sort of get you out of the house, give you more public sort of access to each other. One of the things I really like, if you ever get the chance to visit Istanbul, I once had a 2-day layover there, and I extended a little bit so I could really see Istanbul, and I really, really love it. This is also how I've traveled so many places in the world. Is like I'll have things where I have to fly for some reason, usually for work, and I will fly as cheaply as possible. Usually I try to get tickets that are like half of what they normally are, though that's not always possible, but using layovers as an opportunity to experience other places. Anyway, Istanbul. You have buildings that are like this, a little taller, and people from each building will bring out for dinner their table and chairs, and I'll be sitting there, and everybody's eating together and talking. And if you're clearly foreign, people will like compete to be the person you come and eat dinner with. They'll like, people will invite you and they'll really want you to come sit and eat with them, even if you can't speak Turkish and they don't speak whatever language you speak. They just want to share a meal with you. And again, this culture, this hyper local culture, this thing that the city, the way the city is structured promotes this kind of behavior, because it's not just a bunch of stroads or like places where everybody feels separated and isolated. This creates the ability for this to happen. And it was great because even though I ate with people and I still can't speak Turkish, we didn't have to have a conversation. We just kind of ate together and they fed me things and they like pointed stuff out to me and they let me hold their kids, and I didn't have to like perform socially just to be part of the community and to be part of this connection for this short period of time. And I also really want to stress like introversion and shyness aside, because both of those things are completely valid and they're their own things. A lot of us feel social anxiety and aversion to other people because we don't have opportunities. And I don't just mean we don't have opportunities to make friends, because that's true, but also there are occasionally opportunities, but we didn't learn social skills, generally speaking. School actually makes social skills harder a lot of the time, in my opinion. We have become increasingly isolated, so we're out of practice. We're out of practice for how do we connect to each other in deep and meaningful ways that are not necessarily stressful or taxing. And I think one of the reasons why a lot of people, introverted, shy, or otherwise, can go to, say, a social function and feel completely drained afterwards, it's because most of us are bad at conversation, most of us are bad at listening, most of us don't know how to connect with each other. We have very little things in common that are shared except for different types of consumption. And it is exhausting to try to connect with somebody. And we tend to, I think, feel more lonely as a result. I think a lot of us can feel this really keenly because of the pandemic. Like, I know that I'm out of practice socializing in person. Last summer, I taught at this event and I was there for like 5 days, and I needed like 2 months of doing nothing after that to recuperate. And I'm a very, very extroverted person. And so we get out of practice, and that makes us lonelier. And then that makes it so that when we do try to socialize, there's a little bit of like FOMO of like, I need to make the most of this. I want to connect. I'm so lonely. Maybe not for everybody, but it's a vicious cycle. And some of that is how we've organized our cities and how we have made it harder for us to get practice to connect with each other. Anyway, Gibran, I'm so glad that you're here. I hope everything is going well with event planning, and no worry about not being attentive. I love it with people just put this on in the background and vibe while they do something else. And Silly Millie, you said when the barriers between people are so much lower, the risk feels much less challenging. Exactly, exactly. When small but meaningful, easy socialization is built into the interactions that we have with each other and our daily life. It's similar where people talk about living in human scale communities tends to make people healthier because you have exercise sort of built into your daily life. I will definitely agree with that. I live on the fourth floor of a building with 15-foot high ceilings, so each floor is much bigger than normal, and there's no elevator. So anytime I go out, I have to do a lot of stair work, and then I walk to everything, and it's just built into my day to get quite a bit of exercise every day, and I feel the benefits of that. I don't have to like work myself up to go work out somewhere or like do a video or something. It's just part of my day. I can add more when I want to. And the same thing can also be true with socialization. The same thing can be true with building connection. A lot of the time, we're comparing it to the shitty, stressful, awkward socialization that we do in the world as it is. That's tiring, that's alienating, that's confusing, that's like often leaves us more lonely than if we just didn't talk to anybody. And so a lot of people feel, oh, I just hate people. I don't want to be around people. I don't like people. Sometimes that's true. I'm not going to, like, if you feel that way, I'm not trying to say that your feelings are misguided or not true. I'm trying to say that we make it also very easy for people to feel that way. Yeah, and silly Millie, you're right. We build our walls so high that getting over them feels life-threatening. Absolutely. All right, next one. I think I've shown this before. It's just a picture of someone sitting outside at a McDonald's or across the street from McDonald's, some fast food place along a Strode, and it's saying exactly like Paris. And this is a great example of contrasting what we were just looking at with these like pedestrianized streets that have all these outdoor tables and chairs just like this outside of restaurants, but one feels like you're supposed to be there versus this, it feels like you're in danger being there. To me, sitting this close to like high speed traffic is nerve wracking because people miss lights, they miss turns, they crash into buildings. I don't like it. Okay. I think I've shared this before, but I want to share it again. This is a really good video from DW News, which is Deutsche World News. It's the German public news that's in English. It's the news I tend to watch because I live in a German-speaking country, and it's nice to sort of get more local news. Anyway, how to green your city. It looks at ways we could retrofit what we already have to make it better. And as it says here, how to reduce pollution, adapt to climate change, and make cities more livable. And remember, urbanization is only likely to increase, especially as economies struggle and things like gas gets more and more expensive and electricity and energy get more and more expensive. People are going to more and more flock to cities because they're not going to be able to live in their suburbs and drive around everywhere. And there are going to be fewer jobs. So we want to start to work now to make the cities as livable as possible. Okay, next thing here, somebody posted on the subreddit in honor of that American ambassador talking about Danish people being, quote, forced to ride bikes. I thought I'd show you why many Copenhageners pick bicycles over cars. And I just even want to say, like, look at this. So you have the lane of this road here for this car, plus the bike space, and the bike space is actual bike space. It's not some dinky little thing that's probably going to get you killed. It's also like on-street parking and driveways. This is real infrastructure. It's one type of many types of real bicycle infrastructure, but it's clear that the experiences of bicyclists were considered when this town or this city was being planned. You see there's this raised bicycle sort of highway to go over this area. This is probably a very pedestrian zone, so they don't want a lot of like through bicyclists coming through. And you can see instead of it being stairs down here, it's a nice ramp. And this is also nice because you get a cool view and it's probably feels really nice to ride up here. And it gets you through this area without having to worry about bumping into people. And then you can see here again, there's pedestrian crossings, but then there's dedicated bicycle crossings. You can see here there's this pedestrian pathway, and then there's also this bicycle highway as well. So that way, you know, one of the things that can make it tough is both as a cyclist and a pedestrian is when things are not well separated, bumping into each other. There's some spots in Vienna where like there's painted bike lanes on the sidewalks, but they sometimes like crisscross over each other or like switch, or it becomes really unclear which is which. And then it can lead to some little complaints now and then. But again, this is much safer because you can also see here's a red light that's clearly telling these cars to stop, and then the bicycle highway has a traffic light. So bicyclists are also obeying traffic laws, but it's set up in a way that makes that easy and makes that clear that this is like the rules and how it should be. And it's not just like anarchy, there's nothing for bicyclists and you got to kind of just figure it out so you don't die, but also get where you're trying to go. And then you can also see just metro, how much metro there is in Copenhagen and greater Copenhagen, trains, metro, buses. I mean, this is a place where it's really meant to make it so that, say, the people who live in the outskirts of the city, which may be nice suburbs or might be poorer areas, are welcome to come into the city without needing a car. This is another thing that we haven't talked very much about, which is that if you don't have a good ability to bring people from outside of the city in and back, and from one neighborhood of the city to others, it also sends a clear message about which people living where belong in what other places. And like our use of, and it doesn't mean just direct line, like lines tend to do this sort of thing where they kind of go in this sort of like C or slightly S-shaped pattern through a city. That's pretty common, and they overlap with each other. Some cities will have a ring train, like Tokyo has the Yamanote line, which is a circle, and then all these other train lines for the JR rail system kind of cut through it. It's really nice. Like I used to sometimes just get on the Yamanote line and go around a few times because you get to see a lot of the city that way. But not every city has that sort of ring road. But you can see here, like, there's not, as far as I can tell, a clear, like, if you live over here, you basically can only get down here and down here without going through a lot of bullshit. And, like, because that tends to create extra barriers. If you have to do more than one transfer, it makes things tend to take longer unless everything comes very frequently and is very efficient. And anyway, these things create bigger effects. They add up. Okay. More trams, please. I like this picture. You see this traffic with the average occupancy of 1 to 2 people. It's pretty standard. I don't think you even need to go and check. I mean, in some of the things you can see, but also this is just pretty average versus this tram has 145 people in each car. You can move so many more people. Then it also makes it so a city or town can sustain the carrying capacity in that sense becomes better. Anyway, there's also this tweet I saw that looks like it's in the Netherlands, and it was talking about a Dodge Ram like blocking the tramway because of how big it is. And I don't even know how this car is here, but like you do not need a truck that is this big for city driving. You really don't. I can believe that there are people who need these kinds of vehicles for, where they live and the things that they do. If you're like hauling lumber or cows or something like that, totally makes sense. And then we've got this picture that helps make sense of it, comparing the size of the two best-selling vehicles in Europe and Canada versus the USA. So we have here the Ford F-150 versus a Volkswagen Golf, and the Dodge Ram versus a Peugeot. And you can see here, they're like 2/3 the size. And these cities are not meant for that. Anyway, there's some interesting research here. This was from Melbourne, and there are links to actual research papers down below just here. You can see the sources, but we can see the fatal injury index, so casualties, and risk, so obviously higher risk, higher casualties. So for example, riding a motorcycle is a very high risk activity, usually because of cars. Same thing with bicycles. It's usually because of cars. These are not necessarily absolute truths, because if you had fewer cars and slower speeds and other things, probably all of these things would be less risky. But you can see here, being a pedestrian is also pretty deadly and pretty dangerous, at least in the areas that this study we're looking at, because we don't tend to focus on the experience of pedestrians. We don't tend to really account for a pedestrian's bodily autonomy and the fact that they also need to get from point A to point B. We tend to treat it as, oh, well, you're just either too poor to have a car, which also then fuck you, or you're only walking in between your car and someplace else, is a lot of the way you can sort of see planning goes. And that means that oftentimes, say, crossing stroads tends to be incredibly deadly for pedestrians and cyclists. But you look at trams, buses, and trains, people who die per 100 million minutes of travel time is much, much lower. It's just something to think about. I think we should really consider how many human sacrifices we put onto the altar of fast transit, because it's really unnecessary. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about bodily autonomy specifically. I'm not going to go for too much longer on this because I want to play Stardew Valley, but I want to think, or I'm not going to read too much, is what I'm trying to say. We'll talk about it during game time today. This is an article from 2012, and as you know, I've talked about being Native American, but I also have a lot of Irish ancestry on my dad's side, and like a lot of Irish Americans, particular obsession with being Irish. But as a result, I have heard a lot about Irish culture and Irish history, and my family's trying to get Irish passports and stuff because of how recently some of my relatives or some of my direct ancestors came from Ireland. Like, we technically can get Irish passports. So we're not just like 400 years ago Irish, a little more recent than that. It's where I get my particularly deathly pale complexion from. Anyway, there's a huge, very interesting, very tragic history related to the church in Ireland. Obviously, abuse scandals, just like there were in America, but also there's like the Magdalene laundries, if you haven't heard about this, and there's a lot of stuff to do with abortion, infanticide, abuse of people who are pregnant, and taking and selling of babies. And they're like mass graves outside the Magdalene laundries, or they're just filled with babies that like the church killed, while simultaneously saying that any person who wants to terminate a pregnancy is like evil. And it's also an interesting thing to know is about the time of Roe v. Wade originally being sort of debated, in that sort of time period more broadly, a lot of Protestant churches actually, any sort of, especially like Baptists and stuff, had a lot of like proclamations about abortion being okay, because the Catholic Church is so against it, and the Pope, and Protestants used to hate Catholics a lot more than they do. Both my partner and I have family scandals of Protestants and Catholics marrying each other, and now nobody cares. The same people who like disowned people, 40, 50 years ago wouldn't think anything of it now. Anyway, but a lot of Protestants thought that if you were really concerned with things like abortion, it was like secret papacy, and like you were secretly being like enthralled by the Pope and stuff. So anyway, Ireland has this very interesting history, and I think it's really important to know adoption is not a neutral thing, nor is it inherently positive thing. A lot of people have these really rose-tinted glasses when it comes to the idea of adoption, and think that it's just this sort of like pure act of love and kindness, and it's a great solution to couples who say want to have children and have a difficulty conceiving, or people who are gay and they don't want to use like a surrogate or a sperm donor, whatever. Yes, in some ways that's true, but almost always when an adoption is happening, that usually means something has gone horribly wrong in the life of the person who gave birth to that child, because it was either a child that they wanted and gave up because of poverty, or because the government took their child from them, or because the church took their child from them. A lot of international adoptions have been very exploitative, messed up companies literally stealing children or paying their birth parents very small amounts of money, very coercively going to people who were desperately poor, and instead of actually as a charity helping them, giving them like $500 and taking their child and then selling it to, a happy, perfectly heteronormative and Christian white American family, whatever. There's also, the 60s scoop and other waves of forced adoptions done by both Canadian and American governments of forcing Indigenous children out of their communities, out of their families. It's still a problem today, though the Indian Child Welfare Act, at least in the United States, helped a lot with this, which is, as much as possible, an Indigenous child should be kept within Indigenous foster parents or adoption. But it's very likely that all of those migrant children that were lost and went missing during Trump's presidency were probably put into a forced adoption sort of situation where, because, for example, Betsy DeVos and the DeVos family have run an adoption agency that basically takes children from quote unquote developing nations, third world countries, whatever you want to call it, and they do it as a kind of poverty porn, and they sell them, literally sell them $50,000 a piece or more to families that have to attest to their Christianity and the fact that they will raise the children Christian and are predominantly white. And there's a lot to really unpack there, right? These people are profiting from these adoption schemes, and there's a certain way of viewing children as property. There's actually a passage in this book that I really like. It's called Black Feminist Thought, and it's by Patricia Collins. It is really good, and there's a passage I want to read from it. It says here, the traditional family ideal assigns mothers full responsibility for children and evaluates their performance based on their ability to procure the benefits of a nuclear family household. Within this capitalist marketplace model, those women who, quote, catch legal husbands, who live in single family homes, who can afford private school and music lessons for their children, are deemed better mothers than those who do not. In this context, those African American women who continue community-based childcare challenge one fundamental assumption underlying the capitalist system itself, that children are private property and can be disposed of as such. Under the property model that accompanies the traditional family ideal, parents may not literally assert that their children are pieces of property, but their parenting may reflect assumptions analogous to those they make in connection with property. For example, the exclusive parental right to discipline children as parents see fit, even if discipline borders on abuse, parallels the widespread assumption that property owners may dispose of their property without consulting members of the larger community. By seeing the larger community as responsible for children, and by giving other mothers and other non-parents rights in child rearing, those African Americans who endorse these values challenge prevailing capitalist property relations. So the whole idea with sort of selling babies through these adoption schemes for profit and for spreading particular type of Christian hegemony and reinforcing a certain type of white supremacy is fundamentally very embedded in capitalist thought and very embedded in viewing children as a type of private property. Because if somebody, if I find $50 on the ground and nobody's around and I take it, that's generally speaking, people feel pretty ethically sound act, right? Nobody's around, but if someone came running up and just said, oh, did you find some money here? I would give it back. But like, if there's nobody, it's really clear it's just lost money. a lot of people feel like it's perfectly acceptable to just take it. Now, that's not always true. And for a very long time, Japan had a culture, like especially in the 90s and before, if you went into a department store or walked around, you'd see money taped around because if people saw someone else had dropped money, they wouldn't take it and they'd like tape it to where they found it so that if the owner came back looking for it, they could get it. But in a lot of Western thought, the idea of just taking money that you find on the ground when nobody's around is seen as normal. Because if you have private property that then falls into neglect, abandonment, uh, is lost or forgotten, it's not seen as immoral or inherently unethical to then reclaim it for yourself. And if we say that there are these migrant children who've been separated, either their parents sent them on alone or with relatives or with friends or with a human trafficker, or they got separated at the border or something else, treating them kind of the same. Well, you left your child, therefore I have the right to just take it. No one was around to claim the child, so I claimed it. And seeing children as this tool, and there's also this idea that's old school colonial ideal. Like old school colonialists, you meet some people who are like older and say from places like South Africa, they'll have this mindset that's very paternalistic towards the Black population of South Africa, and we'll see them almost like children and wanting to raise up the little children. Some biblical quotes get put in there sometimes. Similar to the whole kill the Indian, save the man mindset of wanting to deculture and assimilate Native Americans into Christian, white, hetero patriarchy, capitalism, all of that stuff. And wanting to take Black and brown children from parents that we deem less than and put them with the quote right kind of parents is also treating them very much like property. And Silly Millie, thanks for hanging out for a little while. And I agree with Helen Hulk. It would depend on how much it is. If you find 10 gram in a duffel bag, might go to the police. Yeah, and Arad, you're right. Usually this is single bills. Yeah, I would feel ever so slightly conflicted about bringing 10 grand to the police, knowing that most likely the police would just take it for themselves and use it to, I don't know, buy more military grade stuff or something. It's very unlikely that when you turn money into the police, they're going to return it to anybody. But also if someone lost 10 grand, my other fear would be, is this somebody's like drug money that they owe to someone and they're going to get killed if they don't get it back to them? Or like, was this the cash that someone just got from like selling something of theirs? And I would be worried about that as well. So I would probably post on Craigslist. I would probably post on Craigslist something in like clandestine, not super direct, really clearly. And yeah, then eventually, if I found no way to give it back to people, donating it to charity. Anyway, this article here, I'm going to put it into the chat so you can all read it. Really focused on this idea that Irish nuns in the 60s sold orphans to America during the 50s and 60s. And this was very common. You force people to give birth. You don't let them use birth control. You don't let them have any other options. And then you get people who are desperate. They made up to $50 million. And then you sell those babies, and you guarantee you Betsy DeVos and the DeVos sort of empire, like I said, they have this charity that does this, that are in their whole deal is selling children for adoption. And like I was saying earlier, adoption pretty much always means something really went wrong. Either the person who gave birth didn't want the baby and couldn't terminate the pregnancy for whatever reason, or they did want the baby and something went really wrong. Their health, poverty, the effects of capitalism more broadly, and social inequality, poverty, desperation, being penalized for infractions or committing crimes and having your child taken from you. All of this, right? Like, really, if you think about it, anytime an adoption happens, that means that something has gone wrong. And it's not to say that adoption is wrong itself. I'm not saying that people who adopt are all evil. I think that there are plenty of good reasons, and there are plenty of families where, like, for whatever reason, they shouldn't keep their child, and it's in the best interest of everybody for the child to be put with other people. But I would say, like, it's complicated. Adoption is not just this pure, beautiful thing. There are plenty of people who are orphans, for sure. There are plenty of people who, the parents genuinely shouldn't have children, and it is good that the child is in place with someone else, but still, that means something has gone wrong, right? That means that, why do these people who should not have children, for whatever reason, have children? And why are they the kinds of people who should not have children? Is it because they have a drug addiction? Is it because they have emotional issues and trauma and they don't know how to process it and then they inflict it on their children? Again, means that things have gone wrong and society has failed these people in some sort of way. It's not to excuse abusers in any way, shape, or form, or say that it's just they're the real victims or whatever. I'm just saying it's complicated. It's complicated. And there's this important part here that because this was a commercial operation, a lot of the children were placed in homes that were not actually desirable or necessarily safe or necessarily good. And it was about making money. It was about making money. And it's deeply corrupt to do this kind of thing, right? And it's similar. There was this case with this couple that there's this like really famous picture of this like little black boy, quite young. I think it's like 8 or 9. Oh, hello, Sarsaram. And Leverage had a great episode that dealt with this. Interesting. I'd love to check it out. There's this very famous picture of this like young black boy. It looks like he's crying and smiling at the same time, hugging this police officer. And it went around as this like particular example of like racial reconciliation and police. And anyway, it was staged. The adoptive parents were white, forced this black boy to do it for a photo op. They adopted multiple black children. They had a lot of racial fantasies. Remember, I've talked about this, like interracial adoptions often also have fantasies, either power fantasies of how much I'm rescuing this child from this impoverished or terrible situation, or fantasies about what it means to have a child who's not white, or there's a lot of fantasy happening there. And anyway, in the end, none of them are alive anymore. I don't want to give too many details because it's a pretty sad story, but I recommend reading up about it because it talks a lot about the situation came from basically for-profit adoption. And we tend to think of, oh, adoption's so hard and you have to go through all these hoops and have all this money. That's it right there. You have to have money because it's fundamentally capitalism. Just like it was being talked about in this book here from the passage I read about viewing children as a form of private property and motherhood or parenting in general, but motherhood also can be viewed as a sort of economic position. There's some philosophers who take it that the idea that womanhood is economic. It's an economic role under capitalism. And I recommend this book. It's very good. Anyway, I also recommend sort of reading about this, finding out more. If you haven't heard of things like the Madeleine Laundries, because the church killed a lot of babies. Lots of mass graves, also a lot of young women. And so that brings me to the next article I would like to share with you. And I promise this is not going to just stay sad. And you're right, Paladin Hulk, capitalism creates so many problems. It's not going to just stay sad. But there's this also really good article here about infanticide. Um, and infanticide not being seen as the same thing as an abortion. Infanticide being killing a child after it's born, and usually after the socially acceptable space of, some cultures really think that a child isn't really fully a person until, say, a week later, or uh, till it draws its first breath, or all of these different things. And what drives people to do it? Hey, the spoiler alert, it's mostly poverty and desperation. Um, and there was a time period. So I'm going to back up for a second. I meet a lot of people who think Buddhism is this like pure good religion and will tell me about this because I'm a Buddhist monk, and they'll try to say that like Buddhism is like somehow more involved. And I always try to stress, hey, Buddhism is a religion like every other. It's got its good points and its bad points. And one of the examples is the Japanese imperial, or not imperial, the emperor. I don't remember what the word is. Anyway, the emperor um, wanted to get more money for taxes, so he commissioned his like head Buddhist monk authorities to create new hells in Buddhist sort of thought and cosmology, specifically for women who did not have children or who killed their children. And he said, don't make them too bad because not everybody can do it. And I don't want them to feel super bad, but also I want to increase tax revenue over time. And if people, because it was very common in Japan for people to leave their babies outside and let them die of exposure, or starvation or dehydration. And because people would have more kids than they could feed. And if you have only so many children that you can support, it's often this choice between, do my older children get to live or my younger children? Which one gets the ability to live, right? This is common conundrum also in animal kingdom. I mean, humans are animals, but lots of animals that have multiple offspring that they raise at the same time will have to make these sorts of decisions. Anyway, this article is really good, and it talks about, it's not an anti-abortion article. It's talking about the economic and physical realities that become harder the more children you have and the less control over your own body you have and the more poverty there is, which is something very relevant to today. Yes, Paladin Hulk, I don't think there are pure good religions or pure good people. And Aradin, too many people have too many different notions about what is considered good or pure. Yeah, it's very binary thinking. Check out this article. Again, though, this is not all gonna be sad. There is this PhD thesis paper that I found, and I did not read the whole thing because it is 100 pages long, but I have been enjoying it, and it is also related because it's talking about bodily autonomy. And it looks at the relationship between police brutality and the influence on Black people's bodily autonomy by gender, gender identity, and sexuality through the lens of Afro-pessimism and intersectionality. Pervasive culture of police violence influences the bodily autonomy of young Black people. This influence varies by gender, gender identity, and sexuality, mirroring the policing of Black people's bodies throughout history. As such, I advocate for structural change in policing such that young Black people can self-autonomize and self-actualize as full human beings whose lives matter and have independent meaning. So obviously, this is specifically about the struggles of Black people, especially Black people in America. And I don't want to take away from this focus of this at all. And it also highlights to me, this abstract, the fact that one, long histories of policing each other and each other's bodies and each other's autonomy, but when structurally your autonomy is infringed upon, it causes you to not get to live as a full human being in society. And this is why I'm saying bodily autonomy is also community autonomy. Because when we start to feel that we can take away the bodily autonomy of any one group of people and infringe upon that, even if we think it's for their own good, it makes it a lot easier for us to rationalize doing it to other people. So in like early eugenics history, there's the Supreme Court case Buck v. Bell, which is about forced sterilization of people who were deemed sort of mentally deficient in some way. And the state really felt, well, we don't want to have more disabled babies, and disabled people, they can't really have good sex or consent to it. They don't really know what's happening, which is not true. There are issues around power and consent, especially between someone who does not have any intellectual impairments and someone who does, and there are important ethical issues there for sure, especially between caretaker and cared relationships. Um, and that's not what I'm talking about, but in general, we tend to really infantilize people who have any kind of intellectual disability, and we forcibly sterilize them in the United States and most of the world for a very, very long time, and some places still do. And about the time that there was this scheme to start forcibly sterilizing disabled people in the United States, this is also where circumcision really exploded in popularity and became sort of default. And there were all these government clinics set up around the country that were free and really advertised towards Black and brown women, especially Native Americans and people descended from slaves or former slaves. Um, and they would sterilize infant babies, especially the boys. They would give them basically a vasectomy. It would cut some parts, but then they would also give a vasectomy, not a vasectomy, a circumcision, because it would also cause swelling and irritation and everything, and it was easier to sort of hide what they had done. And they also would like do all kinds of terrible things. This is part of where informed consent medically comes from. But these are all connected. The government policies related to forcibly sterilizing people who were seen as intellectually impaired. And this meant also people who just like had migraines or had epilepsy or had like anything that you could get institutionalized for, which was pretty much everything. Direct line to forcibly sterilizing Black and brown people, because there was a fear of people who were seen as less than in a eugenics worldview having too many babies and then overtaking the superior people. And I think you've probably seen it, but if you haven't, there was this Trump rally recently, and there was some guest speaker woman who talked about Roe v. Wade being overturned as a great something for the protection of white life. And she's come out, or her PR team has come out and said, oh, she misspoke. She meant to say right to life. And even if it was just a slip, because right and white are kind of similar, whatever, it's still kind of creating the same idea. Because if you can also force a lot of adoptions to happen, because remember, we criminalize poverty and we take children away from poor people a lot. And we put a lot of poor people in jail and take their babies. We can then create a lot of interracial adoptions, which then we can try to strip people of community connection, cultural heritage, an awareness of where they came from, an awareness of their deep family history, not teach them about things like, you know, historical racism and all of its horrifying forms, and really program them to have a particular worldview. Anyway, I'm getting kind of apocalyptic with this, but these are all connected. They really are all connected. A lot of people have talked about in the Supreme Court's writing related to their decision. In this case, there's been references to all these other Supreme Court cases like gay marriage, the right to have sex with any other consenting adult, regardless of both people's gender or group of people's gender, the right to privacy in your own home, the right to contraception, all of these different things, right? They're all connected. They're all connected. And if I'm not allowed to make decisions about when and if Yeah, it wasn't a slip. I agree. If I'm not allowed to make decisions about my own body, well, then it means that everybody's rights to make decisions about their own body are threatened. And you could I do think that a lot of attacks on transgender people, especially our particular really messed up fixation on policing of trans women's bodies, is itself a threat to all women, not just trans women, because it's always about policing what it is to be a woman and who gets to be a real woman, and then making sure that you live up to that. And making sure that you, even if you are a cis woman, you are woman enough. And these are all things that are connected. And if we're willing to say forcibly sterilize people we deem as mentally deficient in some way, well, uh, some of the people who were institutionalized were people who were institutionalized for things like having alcoholism or migraines or very, very common things. And we can also then, I once took this ethics class. It was specifically looking at like, medical ethics. And there was this whole charity whose whole deal was they were taking babies to put them up for adoption, of course. And the women, though, were women who were, by and large, had some sort of substance abuse problem. And they would pay them 10 grand for their baby if they also got sterilized. And that's incredibly coercive, right? If I'm poor and I'm struggling with some kind of addiction, and you're offering me that much money and also making it so that a bunch of the stressful responsibility I just had from this baby is relieved, though I'm sure this feeling is largely temporary for a lot of these people. And it's a closed adoption, so there's no way for you to get any information about what happened to your kid later, especially if you do, recover from addiction. It's not ethical. I mean, that was the fundamental conclusion of the class, was just like this kind of charity, doing what's good for you because I know better, and not thinking about your autonomy on all levels and also across time, is a very commonplace way of looking at things as well. These are all connected. Okay, this is really good thesis. I've been enjoying reading it. I just wanted to recommend it to everyone. Yes, Senator Iran, you're a woman only and completely in the way that they deem women should be. It's also why it's only women who are competing in the Olympics that have to be subjected to hormonal testing, because there's this old sexist Victorian era science idea, definitely originated in Victorian England and kind of has spread since then, that to be a woman is to fundamentally not be athletic. And so any woman who is in any way, shape, or form athletic is immediately suspect as a woman and therefore must be checked. It's the same thing with the Ohio sports, women's and girls sports bill. These are all attacks on everybody's bodily autonomy. It doesn't stop here. And we have to fight because it's going to get worse. This is a resource if you ever have to. This is from the United Nations about busting 7 myths that undermine individual rights and freedoms related to bodily autonomy. I really want to recommend this because it covers a lot of common arguments that people put forth about why we shouldn't talk about bodily autonomy, and that it's just a white Western concept. Oh, there's no right. Oh, we met our follower goal. Woo-hoo! Thank you, whoever just followed. I really appreciate it. I can't believe there are 220 people who want to come and listen to me talk about these things while saying I'm playing Stardew Valley. Anyway, this article covers a lot of things. The idea that one person's bodily autonomy could affect another person's, or that it undermines group identity. And this is one of the big things, because we talk a lot about like collective identity, collective autonomy. Collective decision making should not circumscribe the rights of individuals, right? I should always have the ability to opt out, to say no of any collective decision that's being made, with the exception of things that will actively endanger or harm other people, right? Like if we're all hiding from like the monsters, but I want to go pet the monster and everybody votes to stay hidden, well, I can't just go because I'll reveal everybody's position, right? I don't know why I'm thinking about hiding from monsters. Or things with like public health, right? But there are issues because this is complicated. Aran, you said, and sadly, I'm sure there are some, not all, that want an excuse to fondle women with no consequence. Absolutely, right? 100%. Here, there's also a myth that some people are not entitled to bodily autonomy. And it does talk about people with disabilities because it's very important. Everybody has the right to bodily autonomy, no matter what our perception is of their capacity. They still have a right to make a decision about what does and doesn't happen. Children are in a special kind of position, and my argument is anybody who is any kind of parenting role, whether they're like the bio parents or they're in the sort of neighborhood or any sort of larger connection there, they have a responsibility to protect their future autonomy. So our decisions and boundaries that we give to children should be largely under the aim of helping to ensure that their future autonomy is intact. But also, you're allowed to set boundaries with children. People sometimes forget that. And bodily autonomy is not just a woman's issue. And it says here, this is the one I want to read, any concern affecting the welfare of half of humanity cannot be dismissed as, quote, a woman's issue. But bodily autonomy does not simply affect women. Every individual should be empowered to claim their bodily autonomy. This includes men, women, boys and girls, people of diverse sexual orientations and different gender expressions. It includes people of all races, faiths, nationalities, and disability status. The report shows that men, too, can be subjected to violations of bodily autonomy, such as through invasive non-consensual anal exams. People of all genders can experience reproductive coercion, behaviors that interfere with their reproductive choices of others, and even rape. As is the case with achieving gender equality, the realization of bodily autonomy will fortify the welfare of all people, men and boys included. There's no other way to say this. So here's another resource from the United Nations if you want to talk with people about bodily autonomy. And this is looking at discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And it does a pretty good job of making it easy to understand. Bodily autonomy is not just about sexual and reproductive rights, but, gender affirming care and how it also connects to everybody's bodily autonomy. And the more we restrict and police anybody else's bodies, the more we're all at work. And I haven't gotten a chance to look at this resource yet, so I'm not going to share it because I'm not sure what I feel about it. I will let you know in the future. So, with all this in mind, let's talk about this more on a community level and play some Stardew Valley for at least 40 minutes. we will play some Stardew Valley. Oh, it says Stardew Valley is already running, which is not true. I'm sorry, Steam. Are you having a bad day? Okay. And you're right, Rod. And if anyone is vulnerable, then it opens the possibility that someday you might be subjected to the same thing as the world changes. And it's not just subjected to the same thing. It's like, Roe v. Wade was fundamentally about the right to privacy, especially in medical care. And if that's been overturned, that means that they're arguing you don't have a right to medical privacy. And Paladin Hulk, does a sexual partner lying about having STIs fall under bodily autonomy infringement? I would say yes. This is one of those things that a lot of people can get kind of like squirrely about, and it comes up in a lot of classes that we teach where people will be like, well, what if I get discriminated against because I say to somebody I'm married and they don't want to have an affair with me, or who I voted for and they don't want to sleep with me because I voted for Hillary Clinton, or whatever. You're allowed to say no to sex with somebody for any reason, even bigoted reasons. This is one of those things, like sometimes people argue, oh, I shouldn't have to reveal that I have an STI or that I am married or any of that because it's the same thing as like, anti-trans sexual discrimination. And it's like, nobody owes anybody sex. And you're still allowed to say no for any reason, even bigoted reasons. Full stop. Nobody owes anybody sex. You're allowed to say no for whatever reason. I have said no to people because I was in the mood and we were gonna have sex, and then I noticed that they didn't clean their ears, and that turned me off so much. And they said I was petty, and I was like, sure, don't want to have sex anymore. And you're just too much of a turnoff. I don't know. Just really struck me, and I was like, yeah, no, I'm good. Changed my mind. You're allowed to say no for any reason. My copper hoe is ready. Heck yeah. All right. Now look at the fortune teller. So yes, not lying about having an essay, especially lying. Ooh, very happy today. So there's one of our pillars of consent is also like information and understanding. And information includes, obviously it's not consensual if there's lying involved, right? That automatically makes the yes that someone gave you not likely valid, even if they would still say yes if they knew, because people really need to have all the information. And the other point is lying itself is, especially in these kinds of things, is pretty non-consensual behavior. All right, I don't remember what I was doing. It is winter. It is void essence. Okay, I can try to bring that. I'm gonna go to the mines. I have not cooked anything in my kitchen yet. Okay, I'm gonna sell this jelly. I'm gonna go to the mines. This is good. This is good. Steel pickaxe. I got some food. Let's do this. Let's do this. I don't know if I need those crocuses for anything. Let's just take all of this because that'll be useful if I need to eat food. And save those. I don't need this wood mallet. Is that everything I need? Yes. And is there anything? I need copper. I need lots of copper. All right, go to the mines. Let's go to the mines and get some copper. I'm gonna take the hit on not saying hi to any of my animals because I need copper. All right. Let's go to 20. Yes, let's go to 20. May have been a little too low in the numbers. Anyway, so yeah, this ruling in the Supreme Court is not good for any of us. Ugh. Okay, it's not good for any of us. It's putting all of our bodily autonomy, our right to make private medical decisions without the interference of the government. And these are private medical decisions that nobody else needs to be involved in, right? It's not like I'm not talking about like, willingly not getting polio vaccine and spreading polio around or something. That's not what I'm talking about. Anyway, let's go. Let's get some copper. Hopefully. Oh yeah, there's copper over there. Nice. I need, and there's the way down. It's already crunchy, the sound. I don't know why it's been doing this. It's really frustrating. All right, I'm gonna turn the sound down because that's not nice. That doesn't sound pretty. Let's just turn it down. We can have it on light for now. No. That sounds bad. All right, no sound. I don't know why this is happening. And Rodden, you said if someone asks you to cut a bunch of tall grass they have is one thing, but not telling you the grass is full of snakes will definitely affect your decision on whether or not you want to take the job. Yes, exactly. And this also applies to sexual situations. And, people will say, oh, well, I don't feel safe doing that. And it's like, okay, well, you don't have to have sex if you don't feel safe, first of all. You don't feel safe telling someone what's going on. Oh my goodness, I thought I changed my sword. Um, but also like it would be non-consensual for someone to then, verbally or physically harm you in some way because you reveal to them, oh yeah, hey, I have this STI, right? Like that's also not okay. It just people sort of can rush to think about the worst possible case scenarios. Um, but yeah, once again, you're allowed to say no to sex with somebody for any reason, even a reason that's seen as bigoted. And like, if someone's going to be bigoted against you, why would you want to have sex with them anyway? That's always my thought. Why would you want to have sex with this person who's bigoted against you? Like, that to me just seems silly. But that's my opinion. That's my opinion. All right, let's see about this. Let's see. Any copper anywhere? Oh, if I can hit the rock, that would be helpful. Well, I found the way down. Oh, I love getting these little dudes. Yes. Okay, yes, some copper over here. Very helpful. And, let's also think about this, right? There's been all these horror stories posted on social media about the time either before abortion was legal in the United States, or people being in countries where it's not legal, and how many problems this has caused for everybody, and the sort of really terrible things that are related. And I really want to stress that like these stories are things that we should think about because like, if you're a cis het dude and your spouse is pregnant and they need an abortion so they don't die, and then your spouse does die and you're left to say raise children that you had but now a single parent, and you can bet that being a single dad is itself quite discriminated against. And there's a lot of my dad had custody of us when I was a kid, for numerous complicated divorces, shitty reasons. But because he wanted to do things like have a reduced work schedule to take care of uh, having two children and being the custodial parent, he got a lot of really sexist things thrown at him. And people assumed that it meant that he was all kinds of different things that they did not like. And it really hurt his career, and not just because of working reduced hours, but because homophobia and sexism, pure and simple. And people were really unkind to him about the fact that he was the custodial parent and it wasn't, my mom that was the one who had us. And there were also really sexist things against my mom related to this, where people felt like, oh, something must be uniquely wrong with her if the woman is not the one being given. I mean, a lot of it just came down to my dad made a lot more money. Um, and courts have feelings about things. But this is all stuff that's connected to everybody's well-being. So then if you have all this trauma of like people's spouses dying, and uh I'm glad it's easier for you. Yeah, I think Arata never wanting to have sex with anybody. It's definitely something that people discriminate against in society and don't understand and is seen as like a problem when it's not. Um, and I would say, yeah, it makes sense in this regard that it's a probably a nice thing to not be in the space where you have to think about these issues as much. Um, and, your bodily autonomy is related to all of this too. Like your ability to say, I don't want to have sex with anybody and I don't want to, like, I don't know if you want to have kids, but, the ability to say as a man or a woman or anybody, hey, I don't want to have children, is also under threat. Like it would be easy for vasectomies, for example, to be also outlawed. My mom was saying to me the other day when she was early in the pregnancy with me, my mom and dad were on a trip in like Ireland and England, because my dad was in the military at the time, and you could get like free flights if you flew between military bases. And she wanted to get a pregnancy test, and it was so taboo. It was basically impossible for her to get a pregnancy test, even though they were married and they wanted to have a kid. I mean, they were very young, but it was taboo to even want to know if you're pregnant because the time the thinking was, why do you need to know? Because if you're married and you're doing everything right, there'll be no problem. And it's just for God to decide. Like, you don't need to be involved in knowing if you're pregnant. God, you'll know when God wants you to know. And can you imagine that today? Like, I mean, it still happens. I've definitely had times where I bought pregnancy tests and people at the pharmacy said things or whatever. Um, but basically, it was impossible to get a pregnancy test. That's the thing. And so, like, even getting to know about what's happening with your own body, right? This is all related. Imagine not being able to know, not legally or like culturally or socially being like basically permitted to know what your own body is up to. That's a thing that does already still happen, but this is really going to push things in a much more extreme direction because we're going to normalize this idea of like, you don't need this information. If you need this information, you must be up to no good. So you don't need this information. Because if you're not up to no good, this information isn't useful to you. And the ability to get any kind of contraception, the ability to sort of like make any of these decisions, it is all under threat. And this is community level consent because if you've got on this scale nobody really having the right to make decisions about their own bodies and like only people who fit into this very particular idea and cultural sort of mindset really being the people who are satisfied, and even then it's going to be not everybody and not all the time. There are going to be plenty of people who like support the system when they profit from it, and then once they don't fit what the system demands, it will become bad for them. Exactly, Carlin. Why are you afraid of surveillance if you're not doing anything wrong? Also, Rodden, I see you wrote some things and I want to read them. Also, I'm going to need to blow my nose in a minute. Um, Aradin, you said, oh yeah, for sure. I think it was in ancient Greece that unmarried men were taxed and excluded from certain events. So that is a direction we could be heading. Yeah, absolutely. All right, give me 1 second. I'm going to mute myself and blow my nose. Okay. So, and then also just the trauma, not being able to make your own decisions about your own life and having, to risk dying anytime you have sex or do anything like that. Like, that's traumatizing. This is not going to be good. This is not going to be a thing where that's, and then it's also a community consent issue and a community autonomy issue because it's going to make people poorer. I mean, it's going to punish disproportionately. And these organizations, this like the DeVos adoption for-profit company, they may be making money off of it, but you can bet that the people that they're adopting from or taking children from are not getting the vast majority of that $50,000, right? Like, that's definitely not what's happening. I need to eat some. I'm out of energy. All right, how much copper do I have so far? Not that much. I need a lot more. Anyway, it's all connected. It's all absolutely connected, you know. And a lot of people, right? It's not just going to be a case of, okay, you have more children than you want or can afford or can support, and therefore you sell them for adoption. A lot of people are not going to be comfortable with that. A lot of people are not going to be like, yeah, I can just put my kid up for adoption and that's fine and sell them. No, I mean, rightfully so. A lot of people don't want to do that. They don't want to have a child and then not know what's going on with it and not have the child. And that's not a bad decision that they would be making and mean that they then deserve the poverty that they are in. Like a lot of people think, this is all connected to everybody's bodily autonomy. All these skeletons are kind of freaky. Oh man. Wow. It's a lucky day, which so far has mostly meant lots of stairs popping up, which is nice because if I want to move on, oh no, get away from me, skeleton. I wonder if I'm going to level up in combat today because it's been a pretty combat. You're right, Krellin. Nobody deserves poverty. And Paladin Hulk, what did you say? I mean, if it was happening, they would be selling their babies, and I think that's illegal for good reason. Oh no, bat. Get away from me, bat. Yeah, I mean, this is going to lead to a lot of problems. A lot of, also, I saw this article from The Economist, and have you ever rolled your eyes with your whole body? Because the article was cited the discussion around Roe v. Wade is overheated, and then the subtitle was overturning Roe v. Wade doesn't make abortion illegal, it just turns it back to the states. Everybody needs to calm down. And it was, of course, a dude who wrote this article, and it was just why unnecessary, my dude. You do not like you don't need to well actually about this. Um, it's not the point. Well actuallying is not helpful here. Saying that this everyone's freaking out because well it doesn't actually mean this. In some states it'll still be legal. Yeah, well, there's all these companies that are coming out and saying, okay, it's been made illegal, but if our employees need it, we'll pay for it and fly them. Well, first of all, a lot of states are probably going to make it illegal to go to another state to obtain an abortion if it's illegal in your state. There, it is perfectly possible for that to happen. Second of all, like, you know, are the companies actually going to do this? Or are they just saying it because it makes them look good right now? Third of all, like, how is this actually going to work? Are people going to have to tell their boss that they're pregnant? How are they going to prove that? Do they have to pee on a stick in front of their boss? Are you going to make them pay for it up front and then you reimburse them? How many abortions would you cover? Like, is there going to become a point in time where it's like the second or third one or more that you're going to start to just shame the person and say no? Like really, there's a lot of questions to ask about these things. But the idea of being able to just go to another state to obtain an abortion or another country or whatever, it helps people who have the means, sure, maybe, but a lot of people are not going to have the means. It's not going to make sense for a lot of people, and it's going to miss a lot of people. Yeah, it's absolutely right, Krellin. Rodney said, i.e., my desire to police your actions outweighs your right to privacy, or at least until it gets to the point where they are on the other end of things. And Krellin, you said it requires a level of disclosure that the vast majority of employees are not going to do. It's pure PR. If a company was actually serious about our employees' access to abortion, it's important to us they'd be moving their offices. And, probably not contributing any kind of political funding to candidates who want to take away people's bodily autonomy and also, lobbying themselves to make sure that there's access, right? Like these corporations have political power. They could be using it in ways that are actually politically effective. And they're not because it is, as you say, Krellin, pure PR. But setting those companies aside, even just I see a lot of people just being like, well, whatever, like you can just travel. Sure, if you have the money and the resources to do that, and it's not illegal for you to travel out of state to obtain an abortion, because it definitely will be in a lot of states. This is not something that's just gonna See, part of the problem is we tend to really want to think about these things on these like hyper individualistic levels, which is the idea that like these individualistic solutions are the things that are going to be fine and like make everything okay without thinking about things on any collective level. I know I talk about collective identity and collective decision making and all this stuff quite a bit, but it's because it's an aspect of just everything that gets overlooked a lot of the time, in my opinion. It's very important. Um, and yeah, anyway. Um, oh, at least one of them tied that to union busting, right? I'm not surprised. And Krellin, you said, or, threatened to move, which would probably lead to Texas quickly backing down from the ban. And Rodney said, I wonder how many companies know this and then they can say, oh, it's illegal, so we can't actually follow through now. Sorry. Yeah, it is going to be This is gonna be a thing. This is gonna be a pretty big thing. Um, yeah, difficult. Difficult, difficult, lemon difficult. That's how I feel about it. All right. I neglected all of my animals yesterday. They're probably all mad at me. It's fine. Yeah, they're mad at me probably because oh no. I probably didn't feed them. That's part of why. Oh, I was just too amped about going and yeah, infamous. Oh, my doggy. Hello, doggy. Ugh, yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sad about all of this. It's a complicated thing, uh, to be a person in these times. Not that that's a very insightful statement. I'm just, it's always been complicated to be a person, right? Like, I'm not saying that this is a uniquely bad time. There's been lots of bad times in history. It's complicated, man. Complicated. Krellin, you said Starbucks statement was, we're going to do this thing, but by the way, we can't promise any benefits changes to union stores. Oh, yeah. Yeah, really. Wow. Just gross. Yeah, look at this fruit. Do I need any of this for the community center? I do need this mushroom, though. That's exciting. All right. Yeah, my animals are mad at me. And I didn't water my crops, but that's not great. Okay, I gotta water them. Gotta make up for yesterday. uh, so yeah, I mean, it's all connected. Every last bit of this is connected. I know this is not a very like controversial statement to say that these all are connected, but they're all connected. Okay, looking at my quests. All right, let's make some mayonnaise and let's make some more wine. All right, cranberry wine. Yeah. Isn't this great? Look at all this. mm, sorry, keep coughing. Alrighty, alrighty. I was keeping all my food stuff in here. That's correct. Do I need any of this for the community center? I don't think so. I don't think I need any of it for the community center. I do need to water my plants, and I think I want to do some fishing. I think I want to do some fishing because that sounds nice. Like catching winter fish. Where is, oh, there's my watering can. Oh yeah, and also my hoe. My hoe is difficult. You okay, kitty? The cat just like flopped down off of this. Um, oh, it just slipped. That's what happened. Anyway, it's all connected. I've said it 1,000 times and I'll say it 1,000 times more. You know, community autonomy, you have to imagine too, like the ability for groups of people to be able to make decisions is also under threat, right? If I'm, not part of the sort of dominant group of people with the most power, and I want to make decisions about my life as a group, and we want to be able to live a certain type of way, these kinds of things are also really effective. A lot of subcultural communities are going to be affected by attacks on rights to privacy and bodily autonomy. and the ability to make decisions, especially if, there's already been all these cases, there have been cases of women and other pregnant people going to jail because of things like miscarriages and it being claimed as, say, like murder. And if I am, then say a gymnastics educator, a yoga teacher, and one of my clients is pregnant and miscarries, they could blame me for what happened. And then suddenly I could be in legal trouble because I should have known that this sort of thing could be dangerous. And it's obviously this is not going to be like, you know, wealthy white yoga teachers kind of problem, but it's not going to be great. That's what I'm trying to say is it's gonna have a lot of knock-on effects for a lot of people in a lot of situations. Everybody's rights are under threat. I did not mean to water the ground. Don't know why I did that. Everybody's rights are under threat. And we really need to take that seriously and honestly push for things like abortion to be legal federally, and it to be just, I think about France. France is a very Christian country, very Catholic. Um, People are pretty devout, and abortion is a right in their constitution. And what does that mean? What is the result of that? Well, it means that they're a very pro birth control country because they have socialized medicine as well. And a lot of people who are Christian feel some kind of way about abortion being legal and they don't want their tax dollars paying for abortions. Fair. That is fair. I do not judge them for having that feeling. And I think it's a perfectly reasonable way to feel. And so what happens then is birth control and contraception are incredibly cheap and incredibly easy to access. And that the way they're trying to deal with reducing the number of abortions that anybody has to pay for is making it so very few people ever need to get an abortion. It's not perfect. And also, like, a lot of people think America is uniquely bad, but obviously, if you've paid attention to the news, there's the issues with Malta. Malta has a complete ban on abortion, and that's an EU country. But then you also have situations like Germany. It's not legal in Germany. Abortion is, the things that have just gone down in America are causing some, discussion and a little bit of change happening in Germany, a little bit of people talking about it. Austria is pretty good on these things, but yeah, no, it's not. A lot of people just kind of have this idea that America is just like really the worst, and it is the worst in a lot of ways, but it's not the only country that is wealthy and fancy that is not so great on bodily autonomy rights. And so far here also with my discussion about like consent and medical stuff, my experience has been most doctors feel if you want them to get your consent, it means you don't want their help and they won't treat you if you say like, hey, please don't just touch me that way, like let me know what you're going to do first or ask for my permission. Yeah, it's all connected. It's all connected. And you just really don't want to live in a world where, all day, every day, none of us have the right to privacy, to bodily autonomy, to like any of that. I mean, that's just so hard. And I mean, autonomy includes the privacy, right? You have the right to decide what's best for your mind, your body, your spirit, your information, your story. Um, I like what you have to say, Aradin. Um, yeah. Really don't want to live in a world. Yeah, that is basically how it is. Oh, yes. And we see this a lot too, right? In a lot of countries, you have indigenous issue. Like, I think just violence against indigenous people and anywhere, right? Like, indigenous environmental activists are some of the people who are the most likely to be murdered, be killed. Um, and there is a reason for that because we do not tend to see the bodily autonomy and the rights to self-determination of indigenous communities as valid. And we tend to see it as a threat to my right to make profit under capitalism. And that results in a lot of people being killed. And then you get allies who come in who are not indigenous. They're like professors or like, very well respected people, usually white, who have this power, and they get murdered a lot too. This happens all the time, all the time. And it's very difficult because, if you're in a place where people, I think about some cultures where a lot of indigenous people are killed all the time, also tend to have a lot of rates of femicide, which is murder of women, basically, specifically because they're women. Um, and a lot of it also has to do with things like pregnancy, where husbands, boyfriends, someone who's having an affair and you're their mistress, if you can't get an abortion and they don't want that pregnancy, it's connected. Yep, there were just a pair of activists killed in Brazil. It's all connected. And so a lot of countries that have really high rates of femicide are also countries that have really high rates of discrimination against indigenous people and violation of their rights, very little bodily autonomy, especially for anybody who's capable of getting pregnant. And then a lot of these other issues, a lot of other types of violence, because once you start to feel like we were talking about with forced sterilization of people deemed intellectually inferior, uh, and the whole idea of intellectual inferiority has got its own messed up baggage and everything. It's very complicated. Saying that someone has like the mind of a 5-year-old or whatever is not very scientifically accurate, or it's complicated. And yeah. So if you feel like you're allowed to just decide for somebody else what they do with their bodies, what's good for them, it's also the problem with the whole effective altruism movement and people like Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson and Richard Dawkins. They all have this idea of like, I can decide what's best for you and I can make it happen and I don't have to ask. And this is the same thing. They can put it under I mean, not Jordan Peterson, but other groups of people can put it under whatever progressive, liberal bullshit they want to spin it with. And to say that, oh, this is actually like more evolved. This is for the greater good. This is because we're like people of science. Yep, you can use whatever excuses you want to make decisions for other people and say it's in their best interests, but when it goes against what they want. And this is a big problem. It's a big problem because, it's one of the things that was a point of contention for me with a lot of people when I lived in France, and I got published in the local newspaper because I wrote this article about France's policy of secularism. Like, it's written into their code of laws that France is a secular country, which makes sense historically. There were a lot of mass murders of different Christian organizations. If you ever watch the movie Queen Margot, it really covers this like overnight murder of a bunch of Protestants. This Protestant sort of ethnic minority that experienced a genocide in France. And this kind of thing happened a lot. So France saying we want to enshrine secularism into the law makes sense. This is not, historically, it makes sense. And in the modern world, that basically, because you're not allowed to wear any sort of like overt religious symbols in public spaces and stuff, and there's all these controls, and like different towns ban certain types of religious things, it means that, say, for example, French Muslims have a unique burden of needing to decide what comes first, their Frenchness or their Muslimness. And the problem is French Christians are not being asked to do that because there's not the same burden. And this tends to excessively also police women's bodies. It still comes back to that, right? There is this policing of women. And because people in France are like particularly obsessed with the burqa and headscarves and veils, and like they made this law for like probably 20 women in the whole country who were going to ever put a veil on their face. And it's illegal now. And that sends a message. It's about policing women's bodies and what they do and don't wear. And we play out a lot of our cultural anxieties on women's bodies through even things like dress codes in schools and things like that. It's all about policing of women, right? And policing women's bodies and their right to decide what they wear and what they look like and what they do and don't cover. And this is connected. So even in a country where abortion is a like constitutional right, you can have these same issues playing out in other ways, and they have knock-on effects. They have knock-on effects that are significant, right? They're genuinely significant. And that affects all of us, right? If I'm a religious minority, but I was born and raised in France, I only have ever known France, it's still going to create a situation where I will have to decide what comes first, my national identity or my religious identity. But again, if I'm French and Christian, I know, Caroline, you're absolutely right. The West is obsessed with the idea that Islam is especially repressive of women when it's not. It's not the history. It is. And it's also why, like, please don't ever say that, like, oh, these laws are like Al Qaeda or whatever. It's not clever. It's just Islamophobic. This is just Christian nationalism. It's not. This is the particular ways in which we're policing women is very much in line with Christianity. This is not some sort of special, particular thing that has anything to do with Islam. All right, I got two things to bring to the community center. And also, Rodden, you said, actually, my friend America would be a fantastic guest for Sundays, as she's a black belt and stunt woman, who's done a lot of work with VO and has really been active. This is cool. I would like to meet this person. All right. Specialty fish bundle. Wood skip. No. Ocean fish bundle. Oh yeah, look at that. I'm gonna complete this. Bundle complete. What? Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I need a sturgeon. And I need to do night fishing. Ugh. I need to be so good about this. All right, where do I put this red mushroom? Here we go. Red mushroom. So I need a red cabbage and I need a duck feather. Okay. I have 12,000 money. So let's see. 10,000, 5,000. Let's do the 5,000. Let's just do it. I'm making wine, so it's going well. Quality fertilizer. But the bus repair. This will be so good. 25,000, 10,000. All right. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. Ugh. So yeah, this is just all connected. That's the main point. Individual right to bodily autonomy is connected to everybody's autonomy at all levels. And it's not something we can ignore. We really, really need to be careful about this. And yep, we're all going to need to stay paying attention. We can't give up. Remember, I think I talked last time, at least at one previous time, I spent a lot of time talking about how, Oh, I need another tuna? What? Another tuna? Okay. For the community center. Spent a lot of time talking about how we can't just get sad. That's not going to help. We can't just get sad. We can't just give up. It's not about that. We got to stay active. We got to continue to try hard and work on these things. I feel like this is the one I just opened. Yeah, here we go. Um, just checking if I need any of these other things for the community center. No, don't hit it with the hoe. Okay, looking good there. Let's make some copper bars. We really need copper bars. I don't remember what we need copper bars for exactly. I just remember needing copper bars. Warp Totem Beach. Okay, I can use those sometimes. And then let's see. Oh, I don't have anything to recycle here. That's kind of silly. Alrighty, alrighty. Um, it's peach in there. Let's see if I can make anything, any wines from these. Alrighty. Yeah, why did I want copper bars? I think it maybe was to make more kegs or barrels. Probably. What do I need to make those? Yeah, copper bar, iron bar, oak resin, and wood. Okay, so that's definitely why I need them. So I can get 2 more iron bars. And I know I have 2 oak resin. So I can make 2 more barrels. So I can make 2 more wine. And it'll be great. There we go. I remembered what I needed the copper for. Yep. All right, let's make some more cranberry wine. Good stuff. Ooh, yeah, and I make some more jam. Let's make some blueberry jam. I could make more from the blueberries, making blueberry wine, I know, but I want money faster. Money! That's what this game's about, right? It's a money, it's capitalism simulator. Uh, yeah. It sounds like you both have Krellin and Aradin. Very cool, very interesting friends. It's very nice. And I need more iron bars and I need more oak resin. But I'll have to wait until spring to get very much more of that. I might get 1 or 2 more out of this time. We will see. We will see. Alrighty, looking over everything. That's good, that's good. My animals are happy. I pet the dog today. Let's say hi again. Oh, you're sleeping. Okay. Okay. Ugh. Stretch. Ugh. Okay, 1 second. I got some messages. Let me reply to them. Um, uh, mm, oh, mhm. All right. Okay. So let's stop here for today. I just realized I had another meeting I needed to go to. I forgot about it. I was just like, "Ooh, we're gonna play forever," and then I realized I just got this message that was like, "We're meeting now, right?" So it was lovely to hang out with y'all today. Thank you for coming and chilling with me and talking about bodily autonomy and how it affects us all. And I really enjoy hanging out with you. It's one of the highlights of my week. It makes me so happy to spend time with all of you. You're all so lovely. It's so nice to connect and to talk about big ideas together and to get to read your thoughts and talk about it. And I hope you all have a good rest of your day, and I will talk to you Sunday. Bye. Oh, wait, actually, before I forget, if you're interested, we have a class starting this Wednesday. It'll be in the mornings, West Coast time, in the evenings, European time. It's our Consent for Leadership series. It's on our website. Check it out because I think a lot of you would really enjoy it, or if you know anybody who might be interested in it, check it out. And this Sunday, I'm streaming, interviewing Jessica Price. So come for that. We're going to talk about consent and Judaism and anti-Semitism and all kinds of interesting things. I actually only know her through the internet. I've never talked to her before, but we're mutuals and have been for years, so it'll be nice to actually get to, know what her voice sounds like. Anyway, I'm very excited. Join me for that. And then coming up soon will be Consent Fest, which will be an all-day thing on Saturday. It'll start with me playing video games. We'll have performances, lectures, interviews, all kinds of fun things, prizes to give away, and then probably more video games at the end. And it'll be our yearly fundraiser. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. It was lovely to hang out with you all. Talk to you later. Bye.